Good afternoon, everyone. I'm California Attorney General Rob Bonta, and I want to say thank you for joining me today as Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford and I announce the latest lawsuit we are leading alongside 18 attorneys general against the Trump administration after it unlawfully attempted to impose sweeping voting restrictions across the nation by executive order. Last Tuesday, President Trump issued an executive order to drastically alter how our elections work. This is yet another blatant disregard of the U.S. Constitution that goes far beyond the scope of his presidential power. Whether Trump likes it or not, our nation is still a democracy, one that values representation and the critical idea that we all have a say in who represents us, that values the right for everyone from all backgrounds to have the opportunity to cast their vote and ensure their voice is heard. The president seemingly had no qualms with the result of the last election and happily took office for a second term. That's because our elections are secure, they are reliable, and he knows it. We'll make sure this executive order doesn't stand. We'll make sure the president cannot disenfranchise voters and leave swaths of Americans without a say in who works for them. Unfortunately, this is now the 10th lawsuit, the 10th time my office has had to follow through on our promise to take action if and when Trump violates the law and infringes on our rights. 10 times in 10 weeks. The narrative that our elections are rigged, quote unquote, is a tired one with no evidence or merit that distracts from the real issues at hand. The president's executive order has no legal justification and far exceeds the scope of his constitutional authority. Let me be clear. Trump is acting like he's above the law. He isn't. He's violating the U.S. Constitution. He can't, which is why we're taking action. The voting restrictions we're challenging in our lawsuit include forcing the Election Assistance Commission and states to require documentary proof of citizenship on the federal mail registration form. This commission is a bipartisan four-member body established by Congress. It isn't one that's required to fall in line and work on behalf of the Trump administration or whoever is in the White House. They're responsible for developing the federal form alongside the chief election officers of all 50 states for the registration of voters for federal elections. According to the National Voter Registration Act, the federal form can only require citizenship verification by attestation, meaning all a voter needs to provide is their own sworn affirmation of citizenship. We're also suing over the requirement of additional documents like IDs and passports that only hinders participation in our democracy. Let me be clear, our elections are already secure. We're also challenging the ambiguous provision commanding the head of each state-designated federal voter registration agency to immediately begin assessing citizenship prior to providing voter registration forms. This impacts a wide range of state and local offices serving low-income and disabled residents and obligates them to bear new administrative burdens. We're suing over the provision that coerces states to alter their ballot counting laws by forcing them to exclude absentee or mail-in ballots received after Election Day. We've exercised our constitutional and statutory authority to determine how to best receive and count votes that are timely cast by mail in federal elections. Many states provide for the counting of otherwise timely absentee and mail ballots received after Election Day, cast before Election Day, received after Election Day. For example, right here in California, ballots returned by mail are timely if postmarked by Election Day and received within 7 days. We're not saying people can vote after Election Day. We're saying that ballots put in the mail by Election Day must be counted, just as a vote could be counted in the final minutes before the polls close. And finally, we're suing over the provision that conditions essential federal funding for elections, among other initiatives, on the state's cooperation with the president's policy aims. This violates states' inherent sovereignty and our constitutional power to regulate the time, place, and manner of federal elections. In addition, the critical funds at issue have in large measure already been appropriated by Congress, as is its job. For example, the Help America Vote Act funds upon which many states rely on to improve election infrastructure, update voting equipment, and enhance cybersecurity are directly implicated. In California, the funding at stake amounts to approximately $125 million over the last 6 years and is essential to administering our elections, meaning that this so-called executive order to preserve and protect the integrity of American elections, that is the quote, would do the exact opposite. Altering our electoral process by executive order is a clear violation of the president's constitutional powers, which is why we're suing the Trump administration and asking the court to issue a judicial declaration that the provisions we're challenging are unconstitutional and they are void. Trump knows that the best way for the people to hold elected officials and government institutions accountable is by voting, and perhaps he realizes the agenda he won on isn't playing out in a way that will make voters want to toe his party line in upcoming elections. We all know that engagement is the lifeblood of democracy, activity, activism, advocacy, voting, which is why we can call this executive order what it is, an unconstitutional power grab that tramples on state and congressional authority to manage elections. It's a threat to our democracy. And it's illegal. I won't sit back while Trump violates the law again. I'll see the Trump administration in court again. This may be the latest lawsuit, but unfortunately, I doubt it'll be the last. We don't expect the president's barrage of unlawful, chaotic, and disruptive executive orders and actions to slow down, which means neither will our work ahead. Fortunately, I know we'll be able to weather the storm because of the dedication and tenacity of the folks on our teams. I want to shout out the folks at DOJ who made today's action possible. They don't do it for the glory or the recognition. They do it because they're mission oriented, but I want to recognize them and say thank you. Michael Cohen, Kevin Quaid, Malcolm Brudigan, John Echeverria, Lisa Elrick, Ann Bellows, Nicholas Green, Marissa Maloof, Christina Bull-Arndt, Thomas Patterson, and Michael Newman. Thank you. And before we open it up to questions, please allow me to hand it off to Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford.
Well, Rob, it is great to see you on the screen, and it's always great to work with you. Many don't know that General Bonta and I have known each other for years, probably over a decade now, serving in our respective legislatures. And I've always known Rob to be an individual who's going to stand up for our democratic republic, who's going to stand up for the most precious right, the right to vote. And I'm honored to be working with him to ensure that we preserve that in this instance as well. Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Ford. I am the Nevada Attorney General. And thank you all for being here today. And thank you, General Bonta, and to the other signatory attorneys general for their work in this vital issue. Recent political actions by the Trump administration require us to all stand together in order to protect our nation's rule of law and systems of checks and balances. I'm proud to be a part of such a united front. The Trump administration has repeatedly sought to ignore the law in the implementation of their goals. The president's longstanding strategy of lying about election results and undermining faith in our democracy has culminated in yet another unconstitutional, illegal, and un-American attempt to, in this instance, impose voting restrictions across the country. I need to be crystal clear here. The president does not have this power. I have said time and again that the president won. He is our president and has the right to implement his policies, his platform, his promises, but he must do so lawfully. And when he does not only will we meet him in court, we will beat him in court. Nevada, California, and every other state in every other sovereign entity empowered by federal law to make the rules governing our elections is included in this conversation. It's an integral part of our country's separation of powers. The president has no constitutional power to rewrite state election laws by decree, nor does the president have the authority to modify the rules that Congress has created for elections. In Nevada, we've implemented automatic mail-in ballots. We have extended the amount of time for ballots to be counted, and we have expanded automatic voter registration. We've done this because in our state, it is important that every citizen in Nevada has the opportunity to cast his or her ballot. Voting is a right guaranteed to Americans, and that right must be available. My good friend, Secretary of State Francisco Aguilar, has done a phenomenal job with Nevada's elections. He works diligently to ensure that elections are indeed safe and secure. And he and I work closely together to ensure all relevant laws are followed and voters and the poll workers are kept safe. This is to say that while this order is on its face unconstitutional and illegal, it is also unnecessary. It is not needed. Every state has safeguards in place. Every state takes it seriously. Every state has a vested interest in seeing this process play out with care and with consideration and with accuracy. To insinuate otherwise and to seek to impose restrictions based on these insinuations is political gamesmanship. Frankly, it's illegal political gamesmanship. Blackmailing states with the removal of election security funding unless we comply with the order is a far more damaging and harmful threat than any perceived dangers the president is peddling falsehoods over. Attempting to commandeer state agencies and personnel for political posturing is a violation of state sovereignty and a waste of taxpayer dollars. Placing further restrictions on military or overseas voters is an unfair restriction on their democratic rights and could have a cooling effect on their election participation. Our elections, again, they are safe. Our elections, again, they are secure, and our elections are our state's responsibility. Whether you are from California or Nevada or Texas or South Carolina, the Constitution gives states the power to run their own election administration. I've said since the beginning of this administration, again, that the president won in 2024 and therefore has a right to work to enact his policies. He does not, however, have the right to ignore the law, to rip powers from other branches of government, or to act without a care for our system of checks and balances. Nor does he have a right to step on our sovereignty. If he does those things, which we have seen him do so many times before, I will meet him in court and I will beat him in court. And I'm proud to work alongside dedicated servants like my good friend, Attorney General Rob Bonta, Nevada Secretary of State Francisco Aguilar, and so many others across the country to say enough. So thanks again, General Bonta, for working with us on this. And thank you to all of our signatories to this lawsuit to ensure that we continue to uphold the rule of law. That rule did not change on January 20th. We will continue to uphold the rule of law, irrespective of who's the president. And when they violate the law, we will meet them in court and defend it. So thanks again, everybody. And we will open it up for questions.
If you would like to ask a question, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. You will then be moved into the queue. Please wait to speak until I invite you to speak and state your question. We will then unmute your mic. You may also use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Again,
As questions come in, let me likewise acknowledge those in my office who work so diligently on this. My Solicitor General, Heidi Perry Stern, my First Assistant, Craig Newby, and our Senior Deputy Attorney General, Lena St. Jules. Thank you so much for your work on this. It is imperative that you continue this type of work because people are depending upon us. So thank you so much for your good work.
And our first question comes from Phil Willen. Phil, you are now unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for allowing me to ask a question. Happy to meet you. My question is related and kind of tangentially, basically, the Republicans, including the Trump administration, have made some inroads among the people in the countries and in different states about voter ID laws, basically that there are many states, as you know, that require voter ID. I guess my question to you, and California may have it, may see it on the ballot in the upcoming election, or potentially. I guess my question is, what is the harm in requiring voter ID for people casting ballots? And given the fact that we have many states that already require it, are you aware of any problems in those states that would cause you alarm?
Thanks. AG Ford, mind if I take a crack at this one first? Thank you. Well, I think the main point here is that this is about the authority of the executive branch versus the authority of Congress and the states via the U.S. Constitution's election clause. The authority to determine issues about the place, time, and manner of elections is given to the states and to Congress, not to the executive branch. So that is the core of this case. It's about an unlawful attempt to exercise authority that the Trump administration does not have, regardless of what the policy is. So the policy is a separate issue, and the policy is an issue that states can and should decide. The fact that some states have decided that they want voter ID is up to states. The fact that some states have decided they don't want proof of citizenship because they think it's burdensome and they believe it will disenfranchise voters is up to states. That's the whole point. It's not the Trump administration's issue to determine. And there's a lot of data on this. I'm sure you're aware of it. There's a disenfranchising impact on seniors, on Americans with disabilities, on students who have a student ID, on people who don't drive or don't drink and don't have an ID. You need to take time off from work to get appropriate documentation at times. You need to pay money to get appropriate documentation at times. You might have a documentation that is appropriate, but it's expired and it's too difficult to get before you vote. And the whole point, at least as California has taken a position on this, is that it's not necessary. There is no evidence of any widespread voter fraud. There is no evidence that proof of citizenship is needed to secure the integrity of our elections. And your point about what's the data about disenfranchisement in those states that have used voter ID, that's going to be a tough one to measure. The folks who aren't able to vote, not sure how you would get that metric. But there's a whole history of different obstacles that have been put in the way intentionally over the years to disenfranchise certain groups of Americans. And we believe in California that those barriers should be removed. The pathway to the right to vote, a fundamental constitutional right, the right from which all other rights flow, should be given to as many eligible, qualified voters as possible, free of unnecessary restrictions and obstructions.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great response, Rob. And frankly, I could probably not say it better. I won't spend frankly much time on this because the underlying issue, as Rob indicated, is that the president doesn't have the authority to operate in this particular area. That's what we're talking about. This executive order is what we call in legal terms ultra vires. He has no authority to operate in this area. It is up to the states and up to the federal government. Now, I will briefly respond to your question about voter ID, because in Nevada, it is a ballot issue. It did pass with 70% of the vote this past election cycle, and it will be on the next ballot, and people in Nevada are interested in the conversation. I will say to you that as a matter of analysis, it's not a question of whether it makes sense per se. It's not a question of the rationality behind it all. It's not my rule. It is a Supreme Court requirement that says that if you're going to place any new requirement, regardless of what it is, before they can exercise their right to vote, it has to be a compelling reason and a narrowly tailored approach to getting that done. That's not my rule. That is the constitutional rule. And so when people claim that there's voter fraud that's widespread, that requires us to institute voter ID to cut back on that, then the question becomes, prove it. Because it makes sense rationally, but when they go to court, they can't prove it. There are 3 judge panels all across the nation that have indicated that there is insufficient evidence of widespread voter fraud to require a brand new requirement to be placed on someone before they can exercise their constitutional right to vote. And so with that being the fact, the question in my mind becomes, what's your true motivation? If in fact there is insufficient evidence of widespread voter fraud that would require everyone to have an ID, what's your true motivation? I'm an African-American gentleman from the South. I've seen disenfranchisement before, and I must ask, is that the ultimate motivation? And so at the end of the day, it's a question up to the states. The states are making these determinations. It's not a question really before us right now because we're talking about an executive order that is ultra vires in and of itself. But I thought I would take a little time to just remind everybody that this isn't something that Rob and I made up. Our U.S. Supreme Court has told you what is required before you can put a brand new requirement before someone to exercise their right to vote. And time again, it has been proven and disproven that there is no widespread voter fraud that should result in a requirement of voter ID being required.
Thank you. Again, if you would like to ask a question, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen or by typing it into the Q&A feature. Seeing no other questions.
Thank you. I'll just close. We're unfortunately seeing an ongoing theme here with the president and his administration consistently trying to exercise powers that they do not have, powers that belong to Congress, powers that belong to the states. And this shouldn't be an issue that's right or left. It's about right or wrong. It's about what authority the executive branch actually has under the law and the U.S. Constitution and what authority he does not, and it does not. And here we have a clear example of the executive branch, the Trump administration, trying to exercise authority that does not belong to them. It's unlawful. It's unconstitutional. And we are very confident we will be able to stop them in court, which is why we brought this lawsuit. So we will continue to uphold the rule of law and support our democracy and uplift our Constitution. AG Ford.
Thank you again, General Bonta, for the opportunity to work with you on this. And thank you to all of our colleagues who've joined this lawsuit. It's an important one for us to continue to stand up for the rule of law. We have a president who claims and touts that the law and order should be the order of the day when there is no law that he wants to follow, and there is no order, but only chaos. And under these circumstances, we will stand up to protect the rule of law because that is a responsibility of every attorney general in the state. I will not back down in the face of unlawfulness and illegality. And this is another circumstance where the president is acting both unlawfully and illegally and overstepping his bounds. And so we will continue to stand up for the people of Nevada, just as my colleague Rob Bonta is standing up for Californians, and every colleague of mine who is signed on to this lawsuit is representing their constituency. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Have a great evening.
Proud to work with you, Attorney General Ford. Thank you all.